Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Jackie Kiger, a professor here at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and I'll be the host of this session. The Power of the Positive, enhancing student engagement. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Now, when I say chat, please use the Zoom chat at the bottom of your screen, not the Whova app chat on the right. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Ellen Beatty of the University of Arizona Global Campus. The microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for hosting our session today. And thank you to the live guests who are here. It's so wonderful to see familiar names and faces. So welcome to the Power of the Positive, enhancing student engagement. Today, we are going to have a conversation around the mission of supporting student engagement and the achievement that often follows student engagement. We will begin with an overview of positive psychology, a chat about how our understanding of emotions has evolved, and then we'll explore strategies in alignment with a framework that's been conceived to build meaningful interactions in online learning. So many of the themes of today's presentation will support our UAGC culture of care. We'll explore our practices and perhaps we'll add something new to our toolbox. So I want to start with a couple of grounding principles. The first is that engaged students are invested in their learning, and that investment leads to better learning outcomes. Second, that positive emotions can be crafted. Those positive emotions lead to mental states that last far beyond those fleeting emotions. And those mental states contribute to engagement. And finally, that positive psychology interventions have successfully been applied with powerful outcomes in other settings. So let's explore their use in online learning. So our game plan for today is to take a deep dive into positive psychology, to skim the surface of what we know about the neurobiology of emotions, and to do that within the framework of online interactions. We'll ask and hopefully bring some insight to the question, can we enhance student engagement through the use of positive psychology principles? So I'd love to get that chat box participation open and starting. And I'd love to ask the question, which educational experiences have led to your highest level of engagement? Now you can answer this question from the perspective of being a student, or you can answer the question from your perspective of a faculty member or staff member. I actually did launch a poll in our app, and I asked the same question. So is the faculty member the driving force of your engagement, or is the content of the course, or your interactions with others, or perhaps all of the above? Now, interestingly, on the app, all of the above was the winning response. So we'll look at all of those interactions as we progress through today's conversation. So let's start with a little bit of positive psychology 101. What is positive psychology? Well, it's psychology that is oriented to the positive. More specifically, it's the study of what constitutes excellence in individuals, groups, and communities. Content areas that are studied under the umbrella of positive psychology include things like finding meaning in experiences, driving motivation, productivity, resilience, the study of positive emotions, and the study of using a strengths-based approach to being our best selves. But one of the ways that we can look at positive psychology today is to look at some of the pioneers in the field of positive psychology. And the first one that I want to bring your attention to is Dr. Seligman. Dr. Seligman in 1998 gave a presidential address to the American Psychological Association. He put forth a call to action. While traditional psychology was focused on maladaptive behaviors and fixing what was wrong with humans, Dr. Seligman wanted to offer a new perspective, a new direction. He wanted us to study what enables individuals and communities to thrive. He put forth the theory of well-being, mentioning that well-being should be the focus of the human experience. So his theory of well-being uses 5 building blocks of flourishing, flourishing being the goal of positive psychology. So he mentions positive emotions, engagement with our work, right? This idea of flow, building positive relationships in our life, finding meaning in what we're doing, and accomplishment or achievement. A second pioneer in positive psychology is Dr. Fredrickson. Dr. Fredrickson is from the University of North Carolina, and her career has been spent studying positive emotions. She found 10 core positive emotions that most of her research is surrounding. You can see it on my slide right here. And she talks about the upward spiral of positive emotions. So often we hear about the negative spiral of emotions and how one bad experience and one emotion leads to another. But Dr. Fredrickson mentions that we can also have upward spirals of positive emotions, one positive emotion leading to another. She put forth the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. She says that positive emotions serve 2 core functions. One, to broaden our perspectives, to keep us open and curious to possibilities. She also says that positive emotions also build psychological capital, keep us focused on future emotional and intellectual resources. Dr. Fredrickson believed that positive emotions led to positive states of mind, and that those positive states of mind stick with us far longer than those emotions do. So let's look at some of the core concepts around the field of positive psychology. And the first that I want to share is that people can flourish and thrive. Not some people, but all people can flourish and thrive. That we're not determined by our past, our biology, our cultural conditioning, or our unconscious motives. Positive psychology also sees positive emotions as important and independent from negative emotions. Independent in that we can't simply remove negative emotions and positive emotions and assume positive emotions will flow in, that we need to emphasize and build positive emotions within our life. Positive psychologists also focus on building resiliency through focusing on strengths, personal character strengths, understanding our strengths, working towards them, and then collaborating with others so that we can build positive communities, and also building meaningful connections with others. And finally, positive psychology is always the science of what is right with people, how we can be at our best, and how positive interventions can be applied. So positive psychology has been applied to so many other fields: healthcare, business, coaching. And in those fields, they often answer a series of questions. And I think you can see some similarities between these questions and what we seek to do within the field of education, such as, how do I motivate people to be their very best, right? How do I motivate students to be at their very best? Or how can I build an engaged and supportive team? How can I add individual meaning to employees while reaching organizational goals? Just a few word changes here. We can see that in education, we're often asking and answering these same questions. So just like we can see the shift in psychology to a positive psychology movement, we can also see a shift in our understanding of emotions from the neuroscience perspective. The traditional view of emotions was that they were automatic, often unconscious behaviors, that they were often housed in certain areas or structures in our brain, that they were characterized by facial expressions, and that they were universally recognized. We've come to evolve our understanding of emotions, and we now understand that emotions are more context dependent. They're often structured within the moment, and they're informed by our lifetime of experience. This shifting, evolving understanding of emotions means that we are more in control of our emotions than previously thought. So let's look at what positive emotions and learning looks like. So do positive emotions during the process of learning correlate with learning and engagement? You don't have to look too far into the research to find the control value theory. Academic emotions influence learners' motivation to learn, their learning strategies, and self-regulated learning, thereby influencing their learning achievement. So we can find that positive emotions are often correlated with engagement in deep learning and associated with students adopting both mastery and performance goals in the learning process. We can also look to other studies that looked at happiness and enjoyment and how those emotions actually increased interactions between learners and instructors. So what is it that we're talking about? We're talking about strategies. We're talking about strategies that are purposeful, intentional, and deliberate, and from the foundation of the neuroscience of emotion and the principles of positive psychology. We're going to use these to look at effective instructor-student interactions, and we're going to aim to promote a positive culture through facilitation and content. So I'd like to bring your attention to the transactional distance theory. Now, this is a theory that is somewhat dated, 1993, from Moore, Dr. Moore, and he proposed that perceived pedagogical difference between instructors and learners can be minimized by purposeful interactions. The theory does focus both on organizational and instructional principles, and they talk about three distinct dynamics that guide the social and emotional connections within a classroom. So learner to instructor interactions, learner to content, and learner to learner. This framework was perceived to alleviate the feelings of distance that are so common in online learning, to minimize the communication gaps, and really to address the motivation of learners. So we're going to look at each of these three quickly. The first, learner to learner interactions. Now, as I talk through these three, I'm also going to share a study that was produced a couple of years ago, Martin and Bollinger, that looked at online learners' most valued interactions within these three categories. So let's look at learner to instructor. Now, learner to instructor, according to Martin and Bollinger, is the one that prompts the highest engagement levels. So when you compare it to learner or learner to content, learner to instructor, the relationship that a learner has with their instructor is the single most important factor in engagement. So from that article, we can see that having a high communication strategy, high quality communication strategy, using varied communication channels to increase the richness and frequency of relationships, and the focus on building relationships throughout this interaction. We can also see the positivity principle, that people learn better from instructors who exhibit positive emotions rather than the ones who exhibit negative emotions. So I've peppered in some of the positive psychology principles or research elements that we can see in these learner interactions. So moving beyond learner to instructor interactions, the second one that we're going to look at is learner to learner. So the interactions that occur between our peers, synchronously or asynchronously, but without the instructor's direct involvement. So we can see from the research that the interactions that students value most in this learner to learner interaction are discussion boards, live chat sessions, group tasks, and peer assessments. So the learner to learner interactions are the ones that are building our social connections and building the community within our classroom. Finally, we have learner to content, the one-way processing of elaborating and reflecting on course content. Learner to content strategies that are most valued by students are discussions with guiding questions, application to realistic scenarios, and the ability to interact with their content in more than one format. You'll also see that I mentioned emotional design. Now, emotional design is in its infancy, but it's examining the role of instructional design that conveys emotion to learners within the course structure. So how can we weave positive psychology interventions into online learning? How can we do this from a framework of positive psychology? And how can we do it from the framework of Moore's model of online interactions? So we'll look at this in 3 different areas. We'll look at overall culture, we'll look at facilitation approach, and we'll look at academic content. And I think that you'll see some overlap here. Of course, overall culture could not be, does not stand alone. It does involve facilitation approaches. It involves the academic content. But let's take a look at overall positive culture. Let's first look at what the elements of culture include. So the elements of culture include positive relationships within the classroom, clear communication, the ability to build community. It also includes effective instructional practices, engaging materials, and fair and consistent assessment practices. So what are some strategies that we can look at, we can explore, and we can implement in our own classrooms to make sure that we are including a positive culture for our students? Well, the first is clear and consistent structure. A get started here, perhaps weekly overviews and summaries, weekly opportunities for interactions and questions. We can also promote a positive culture by early, frequent, and personalized messaging. So those welcome announcements that are posted for the whole class can be followed up with personalized welcome messages to individual students. We can also look to infuse positive elements into the announcements and messages by using tone, imagery, and font and color can go a long way to expressing emotion. A third way that we can focus in on positive academic culture is personalized and supportive feedback. So much of the literature talks about alternative forms of feedback using video feedback, audio feedback, in addition to text feedback. We want to make sure that our feedback is seen as supportive, right? Comes from a sense of caring and is also future focused on improvement. Now let's look at facilitation. And let's remember that positivity is contagious. Positivity helps us to build social connections. It nurtures deeper interpersonal connections, and it can foster high quality relationships. When we're thinking about facilitation, we want to keep focused on the whole group because students working collaboratively often achieve higher academic outcomes. And finally, we want to make sure that we are using multimedia content because that is a perfect place to elicit student attention. And student attention is often the precursor to student engagement. So we can really use multimedia content to focus positive emotions. So let's look at some strategies around facilitation. We can focus on collaboration. We can find ways within our existing content for students to make connections and to work together. We can encourage social interactions. So keeping those announcements open, prompting student comments for those announcements. We can also emphasize the importance of peer-to-peer support, building the connections between students when we can, and encouraging them to reach out to each other for support. And then, as I mentioned, multimedia content, including our favorite memes, our favorite quotes, and infusing humor can go a long way in reducing the anxiety or stress that so many students face. Finally, let's look at academic content. We can expand beyond the existing content, and our standardized course content still provides a great deal of instructor flexibility. We can use content creation to promote positive emotions, specifically joy, interest, amusement, and inspiration. We can use that course creation content to emphasize the real person behind the posts and the announcements. And we can look at positive instructional design research, even though it's within its infancy. We can look at course design. We can explore ways to engage very positive design elements that are shown to have significant outcomes to learning engagement. Are there ways that we can infuse positivity within our course design? Are there ways that we can make staying on track easier for our students? Are there ways that we can wrap up one week and look with hope and optimism to the next? We can also explore multimedia. Research is very clear that images and videos, as opposed to plain text, can really go a long way in supporting engagement of students. And finally, we can look at instructor content, instructor created content. So we can look at higher engagement levels for instructor created content. So the time that we're spending with the audio and the video lectures is time well spent, according to the research. Students are much more likely to engage with instructor content than they are with textbooks or publisher materials. So those are a couple of ways that we can look at expanding our positive psychology strategies into academic content, into facilitation, and to creating an overall academic positive structure. So I'd love to see a couple of more comments as we're finishing up today in the chat box. What ideas, strategies, or insights will you leave this session with today? Or how can you commit to exploring the power of the positive in your program, in your classroom, or with your individual interactions with your students? Or finally, what positive psychology strategies interest you? Thank you so much for being here today with me. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box. And if you are interested in positive psychology, ways that we can infuse it into our classrooms, I encourage you to reach out to me. I would love to continue the conversation. Thank you, Michael. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you, Kelly. All right, well, I was trying to keep my app open and also look at the chat that might have been going on in the app, but it was causing a little bit of feedback at the beginning, so I had to turn it off. So thank you. Presentation puts me in the mindset of learners. Extremely valuable, as I got lots of reinforcement of what I can possibly do in the classroom, right? Reinforcement. So a lot of these strategies are things that we've already been doing within our classrooms. Sometimes it's just good to see the literature and the research that supports what we're already doing. And from Donald, I find that asking if I have answered a question encourages more dialogue. Excellent. Thank you, Donald, for sharing. Well, thank you so much for your kind comments. I think I'm going to turn us back over to Jackie if there's any extra content that you need to share, Jackie. But thank you so much for being here. And I really do hope that some of you reach out so we can continue this conversation, finding new and innovative ways that we can better support our students, looking at what we are already doing and finding maybe a new shift in focus.
And thank you, Dr. Beatty, for sharing with us the power of the positive, enhancing student engagement. We'd like to remind our audience members that this is our last day of TLC and there's still plenty to watch and review. So check your schedules. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.